The ghost market didn't have a real address. It just appeared in the empty spaces between star systems, floating among the wreckage of dead colonies and abandoned stations. These were the forgotten corners of space where nobody asked questions and everybody had something to hide. Jake Martinez sat in the pilot seat of his salvage hauler, fingers dancing across the controls as he guided the ship through fields of spinning debris. Next to him, his robot companion Rick 9 was running numbers on a cracked display screen. The robot had been with him for 5 years now, and somewhere along the way, it had picked up what Jake liked to call personality. "This is stupid," Rick 9 said in its flat mechanical voice. 73% probability we're wasting fuel for nothing." Jake grinned without taking his eyes off the viewport. "Yeah, but that leaves 27% chance we find something good. Those are decent odds in our line of work. Your optimism defies statistical logic." "That's why you need me, buddy." The market came into view slowly, like a constellation forming in real time. Dozens of ships clustered around the skeletal remains of what used to be a mining station. Some vessels were docked properly, others just floated nearby with their airlocks extended on cables. Lights flickered in the darkness, and Jake could see figures moving between ships in old spacesuits that had been patched more times than he could count. They found a spot to dock on one of the outer rings of the old station. The docking clamps groaned as they locked into place, probably hadn't been maintained in years. Jake didn't care. This was exactly the kind of place where you could find real treasures, the stuff the big corporations and the Federation wanted to keep locked away. The inside of the market was chaos in the best possible way. The artificial gravity worked in some sections but not others, creating these weird pockets where merchants and their goods just floated in midair. Jake had to duck under a Kresh trader whose 6 legs were flailing as it tried to show off some kind of alien artifact to a potential buyer. The air smelled like a mix of engine oil, exotic spices, and recycled oxygen that had been breathed too many times. Rick 9 followed close behind, its optical sensors constantly scanning everything. The robot was always on alert, always calculating threats and opportunities. That's what made them a good team. Jake had the instincts and the guts. Rick 9 had the brains and the caution. They wandered through the maze of vendors for almost an hour. Most of it was junk or stuff they'd seen 100 times before. Stolen cargo, illegal weapons, information chips containing corporate secrets. Standard ghost market fare. Jake was starting to think Rick 9 had been right about wasting fuel when the robot suddenly stopped dead in its tracks. "Wait," Rick 9 said. "I'm picking up something weird. 40 degrees to your right, look up about 15 degrees. Jake turned and looked through a cloudy viewport that probably hadn't been cleaned since the station was built. At first he didn't see anything unusual. Just more floating debris and darkness. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw it. The ship hung in space about 2 kilometers away, completely separate from the market's activity. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of Jake's hauler, but it looked like it had been floating out here for 1,000 years. Every surface was covered in thick rust, the kind of corrosion that should have eaten through the hull and turned the whole thing into a cloud of metal dust ages ago. But that wasn't the strangest part. Despite looking like it should fall apart if you breathed on it wrong, the ship was holding perfectly still. Not drifting, not tumbling, just hanging there like it was frozen in time. And covering every inch of the rusted hull were symbols. Markings that seemed to shift and move in the low light, though Jake knew that had to be a trick of his eyes. "Rick, what am I looking at?" Jake asked quietly. The robot's processors hummed for a few seconds. "Running the symbols through my language database now. Checking against 14,000 known languages including dead Earth languages and alien scripts." Another pause. "No matches found. The linguistic structure doesn't correspond to anything in my memory. These symbols are completely unknown." A chill ran down Jake's spine. In 5 years of salvage work he'd seen a lot of weird things. But unknown languages? That was rare. That was valuable. That was also usually dangerous. "Hey, you there." A raspy voice made Jake jump. He turned to find an alien merchant in a patched environmental suit. The translator device on its chest crackled with static as it spoke. "You looking at the wrong ship?" "The what?" Jake asked. "That's what everyone calls it. The wrong ship. Been sitting out there for 3 market cycles now. Maybe longer. Time gets weird in these parts." The alien suit made a hissing sound. "Salvage rights are open if you want them. Most of us prefer staying alive though." "What? What's wrong with it?" The alien's eyes, visible through the foggy faceplate, looked haunted. "People have gone over there. Experienced salvagers, whole crews sometimes. Not one of them has come back. Ship just sits there, quiet as a tomb, waiting for the next fool." Jake felt Rick 9's mechanical hand grip his shoulder, a warning. But Jake was already hooked. He'd seen plenty of supposedly haunted derelicts. They always had an explanation. Usually it was just structural instability or radiation leaks or some other boring reason. But a ship that defied physics, covered in an unknown language, that had swallowed up every salvager who tried to board it? That was a mystery. And mysteries in space were usually hiding something incredibly valuable. "Come on, Rick," Jake said, already heading back toward their ship. "We're going to check it out." "I calculated a 78% probability you would say that," Rick 9 replied, but the robot followed anyway. "For the record, I believe this is a terrible idea. Your objection is noted. Will you at least agree to preliminary scans before boarding?" "Sure. We'll be careful." "Your definition of careful concerns me greatly." 20 minutes later they were in their shuttle, crossing the dark space between the ghost market and the mysterious vessel. The closer they got, the wronger everything felt. Jake had spent half his life in space. He knew what derelict ships looked like, how they moved, how they decayed. This thing violated all of those rules. The rust covering the hull was thick, deep, eating into the metal in patterns that looked almost organic. But underneath, Jake could see hints of sophisticated engineering. This wasn't some cargo hauler or colony transport. This was a ship that had been built for a specific purpose, designed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. And those symbols? Up close they were even stranger. They definitely weren't painted or engraved. They seemed to grow directly out of the metal, raised lines that formed complex patterns across every surface. In some lights they almost looked like they were glowing. "Rick, analyze those markings. Tell me what you see." The robot's sensors focused on the hull. Several long seconds passed. "This is impossible," Rick 9 finally said. "What is?" "The symbols aren't separate from the hull. They're not written on it or carved into it. At the molecular level, they're part of the ship's structure. As if the metal itself is trying to communicate." Jake stared at the ancient vessel floating before them. Metal that talked. Ships that shouldn't exist. Salvagers who never returned. Every instinct told him to turn around, to leave this mystery alone, to take Rick 9's advice and head back to known space where things made sense. But he'd never been good at listening to instincts like that. And besides, the ghost market merchant had said salvage rights were open. Finders keepers, as the old Earth saying went. "Find us an airlock," Jake said. "We're going in." Jake's hand automatically dropped to the plasma pistol on his hip as their shuttle docked with the ancient vessel. The airlock cycled open with a hiss that sounded way too smooth for a ship that looked this old. Emergency lights flickered to life in the corridor beyond, casting everything in a dim red glow. "Power still active," Rick 9 observed. "That shouldn't be possible. A ship this deteriorated should have lost main power decades ago at minimum." "Add it to the list of things that don't make sense," Jake muttered, stepping through the airlock. His boots clanged on the metal floor and he half expected it to collapse under his weight. It didn't. Despite the rust coating everything, the structure felt solid. Wrong but solid. The corridor stretched ahead into darkness. More of those strange symbols covered the walls, and up close Jake could see they actually were glowing. A faint bioluminescent light pulsed through them in slow waves, like a heartbeat. He reached out to touch one, but Rick 9 grabbed his wrist. "I would advise against direct contact until we understand what we're dealing with." "Fair point." Jake pulled his hand back and instead pulled out a handheld scanner. The readings made no sense. The device kept giving him error messages, like it couldn't decide what it was looking at. They moved deeper into the ship, and that's when they found the first body. A human woman in a uniform Jake didn't recognize, slumped against a control panel. Her hands were still on the controls, fingers frozen in position like she'd been typing something when she died. Her face showed no pain, no fear. Just a look of intense concentration. "Check her," Jake said quietly. Rick 9 ran its medical scanners over the body. Cause of death appears to be total cellular breakdown. Every biological system simply stopped functioning simultaneously. But there's no disease, no poison, no external trauma. The robot paused, and Jake had learned that when Rick 9 paused, something was really wrong. Time of death approximately 12 hours ago. Jake felt his stomach drop. 12 hours? That alien said this ship has been here for weeks. I am aware of the discrepancy. I have checked my readings 3 times. They are accurate. They found more bodies as they explored. Humans, aliens Jake recognized from Federation space, and a few species he'd never seen before. All of them dead at their stations. All of them with that same expression, like they'd been fighting to stay conscious until the very last second. There were no signs of combat, no hull breaches, no weapon damage. Whatever killed this crew, It had been silent and absolute. The ship itself was a maze of contradictions. Some sections looked pristine, with technology that seemed more advanced than anything Jake had seen in modern ships. Other corridors were consumed by that organic-looking rust, walls practically breathing with decay. It was like the vessel existed in two states at once, living and dying, new and ancient. This way, Rick 9 said, following some internal map its sensors had constructed. I'm detecting what appears to be the main bridge. The bridge was at the heart of the ship, and unlike everything else, it was clean. No rust, no decay. Control stations hummed with active power. Holographic displays cycled through data in that unknown script, information flowing across screens like the ship was still on an active mission. The emergency lighting here was brighter, and Jake could see everything in sharp detail. At the captain's chair sat one more body. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that came from spending most of your life in space. His hand rested on the main console, positioned like he'd just finished entering a command. Unlike the others, his face showed something different. Not fear or determination, but something that looked almost like relief. Rick, can you access the ship's computers? The robot approached the main console carefully, extending an interface cable. Systems are active and surprisingly cooperative. I'm accessing ship's registry now. Data scrolled across Rick 9's optical display. This vessel is registered as the UESV Prometheus, Earth Unified Space Vessel. That's a designation system Earth stopped using over 400 years ago. 400 years? Jake moved closer. That's impossible. These bodies are fresh. The computer identifies this man as Captain David Rivera. Crew complement listed as 217 individuals. Mission classification is deep space exploration with a primary objective to investigate regions beyond the galactic rim and return with findings. Jake's blood went cold. He knew that name from history classes he'd barely paid attention to as a kid. The Prometheus was the first ship humanity sent on an extragalactic mission. It disappeared without a trace 4 centuries ago. The whole thing became this huge mystery. Started the entire deep space exploration program because everyone wanted to know what happened to it. And now we know, Rick 9 said. It came back. But whatever it found out there came back with it. The robot continued accessing the ship's logs, and suddenly audio crackled through the bridge speakers. Captain Rivera's voice, rough with exhaustion but steady, filled the chamber. Jake found himself holding his breath as the dead man began to speak. This is the final log entry of Captain David Rivera, USV Prometheus. If you're hearing this, then we succeeded in bringing the ship back to charted space, even though none of us survived to see it happen. I'm recording this in what I estimate are my final conscious moments before the conversion process completes. Jake looked at the body in the captain's chair with new understanding. This man had known he was dying and had spent his last minutes leaving a message. 400 years. That's how long the universe thinks we've been gone. But for the crew of the Prometheus, it's only been 17 days since we crossed the boundary into what we call dark space. 17 days that somehow stretched across 4 centuries of normal time. Time doesn't work the same way out there. It's not about physics as we understand it. It's something else entirely, something we weren't prepared for. In the background of the recording, Jake could hear alarms blaring and crew members shouting to each other. But Rivera's voice stayed calm, methodical, like he was determined to get every word right. We found what we went looking for. Proof that our galaxy isn't alone in the universe. Proof that there are other forces, other presences existing in the dark spaces between galaxies. But we also discovered why every advanced civilization eventually stops exploring. Why they all reach a certain boundary and turn back. There are entities in dark space. They're not alive in any way we can understand. They're not dead either. They exist in the gaps, in the spaces between reality as we know it. The recording crackled with static, and Jake heard that same breathing sound they'd noticed when they first boarded. It was coming from the ship itself, from the walls and the floors like the Prometheus had developed lungs. The markings you see covering the hull, those symbols we didn't write them. The ship grew them after we made contact with the entities. The Prometheus is changing, converting itself into a message, a warning written into every atom of its structure. The rust you're seeing isn't decay. It's a language. It's memory encoded in corrosion and entropy. Rivera coughed, a wet, painful sound. 36 hours after we crossed back into normal space, the crew started experiencing it. A presence in our minds showing us things. Beautiful things. Terrible things. The entities showed us the secrets of technology that would make humanity the most powerful force in the galaxy. They showed us how to travel faster than light without needing jump gates or wormholes. They showed us the locations of ancient artifacts, power sources, knowledge that would solve every problem humanity has ever faced. Jake felt his mouth go dry. Technology like that would be worth more than entire star systems. But there was a price, Rivera continued, and his voice dropped lower. The entities in dark space don't think like we do. They don't want to conquer or destroy. They want to transform. To convert organic matter, organic consciousness into something else. Into substrate for their existence. They tried to recruit us, to make us into heralds who would bring more humans back to them. The offer was real. Unlimited power in exchange for bringing them 1,000 volunteers. A long pause in the recording. Jake could hear Rivera breathing, each breath sounding harder than the last. Every single member of this crew voted to refuse. 217 people chose death over becoming missionaries for something we don't understand. But the entities, they're patient in ways that span millions of years. So they gave us what they probably see as a gift. They let us bring the ship home, but they made sure we'd deliver their message anyway. The Prometheus itself became their invitation to humanity. The recording quality degraded, became fuzzy with interference. I've programmed the ship's systems to seek out populated areas and wait there. To attract people like you, salvagers and explorers who are curious and brave enough to board a mystery ship. Most people will leave after seeing the bodies. But some won't. Some will stay and find these logs. And those people will carry a piece of the message with them when they go. You'll dream about dark space. You'll see the possibilities. And eventually, some of you will want to go there. Will want to see what we saw. Jake realized his hands were shaking. He already felt it, images creeping into his mind that weren't his own memories. That's how they spread their influence. Not through force, but through the infection of wonder and curiosity. They plant seeds in species after species, and eventually someone always returns to them willingly. That's why the ship looks like it's dying while still maintaining power. It's broadcasting on every possible frequency, designed to be impossible to ignore, to draw attention across entire sectors of space. Captain Rivera's voice was fading now, barely a whisper. I'm sorry we brought this back. Sorry we weren't strong enough to destroy the ship before dying. But maybe you'll succeed where we failed. The reactor has fail-safes. In 48 hours from my death, they'll trigger an overload. The explosion will sterilize everything in a 300-kilometer radius. Enough to destroy all evidence but not enough to threaten nearby stations or settlements. A long rattling breath. Or there's a manual override in Engineering Section C. Trigger it and the reactor goes critical immediately. You'll have 90 seconds to reach your ship and clear the blast radius. Your choice. The recording crackled one final time. But know this, whoever you are. The moment you stepped aboard, you became a carrier. You'll dream their dreams now. See their visions. Most people can resist. I hope you're one of them. Because if you're not, if even one person decides the knowledge is worth the risk, then they win. They always win eventually. The audio cut out completely. Jake and Rick 9 stood in silence on the bridge of the Prometheus, surrounded by the dead and the dark, while somewhere in the walls, the ship continued its breathing rhythm, waiting patiently for them to make a choice. Jake stood frozen on the bridge, Captain Rivera's final words still echoing in his mind. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the ship's cold air. Rick 9's optical sensors focused on him, reading his vital signs with mechanical precision. Your heart rate has increased by 42%, the robot said flatly. Pupil dilation is significant. Elevated stress hormones detected. You're experiencing exactly what Captain Rivera described in his log. Yeah, I noticed, Jake said, his voice tight. Already his mind felt crowded with images that weren't his own. Vast empty spaces between galaxies where darkness moved like liquid. Structures that twisted in ways that hurt to look at but were somehow beautiful. And underneath it all, a whisper promising understanding beyond anything humans had ever achieved. Can you resist it? Rick 9 asked, and there was something in the robot's tone that almost sounded like concern. Jake pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push the visions away. I don't know. Maybe. Can you? I am artificial intelligence. I do not dream, therefore their mental influence cannot affect me the same way it affects organic minds. However, my calculations suggest that if we remain on this vessel for more than 20 additional minutes, your probability of complete mental infection reaches dangerous levels. The ship's breathing sound grew louder, like the Prometheus knew they were talking about it. The symbols on the walls pulsed with that bioluminescent glow, brighter now, almost eager. Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that the vessel was waking up fully, recognizing that its message had found a new host. Show me the countdown, Jake said. How long until the automatic failsafe triggers? Rick 9 projected a holographic display. 46 hours, 12 minutes, 7 seconds from Captain Rivera's time of death, which gives us approximately 45 hours remaining. Jake looked around the bridge at the bodies of Rivera's crew. 217 people who'd chosen death over becoming messengers for something they couldn't understand. That took courage beyond anything Jake had ever experienced. These weren't soldiers trained for sacrifice. They were explorers, scientists, regular people who'd signed up for adventure and ended up facing something that challenged everything they believed about the universe. Captain Rivera mentioned a manual override, Jake said slowly. In Engineering Section C. We could trigger it, destroy the ship immediately instead of waiting for the automatic system. Correct. However, you would have 90 seconds to reach our shuttle and achieve safe distance. The probability of success is acceptable but not guaranteed. We would need to move very quickly. Jake walked to the main console where Rivera's body sat. The captain's hand was still positioned on the controls, and Jake could see what looked like a final command entered into the system. The old man had spent his dying moments trying to save people he'd never meet from a threat they couldn't imagine. But there was something else bothering Jake. Rick, if Rivera was so worried about the ship spreading its message, why didn't he just crash it into a star? Why bring it back to populated space at all? The robot processed this question for a moment. Unknown. Perhaps the entity's influence prevented such action. Or perhaps Captain Rivera believed humanity deserved a warning rather than simply disappearing without explanation like so many other lost ships. Jake moved away from the captain's chair and started examining the other stations on the bridge. Data streamed across multiple displays, most of it in that unknown script. But some screens showed information in standard Federation language, as if the ship was trying to make itself understood. Rick, can you download any of this data? Information about what they found out there? I can attempt it, but I would need to establish a direct connection. I cannot guarantee the downloaded files won't contain corrupted code designed to spread the entity's influence. Use isolated storage. Keep it completely separate from your main systems. If anything looks suspicious, dump it immediately. Rick 9 extended an interface cable toward the main console, then hesitated. Jake had never seen the robot hesitate before. Jake, I need to point out that attempting to salvage information from this vessel may be exactly what the entities want us to do. Every action we take could be predicted, manipulated. We might believe we're acting independently while actually serving their purpose. The words hit hard because Jake knew they were true. How could you fight something that thought in timescales of millions of years? Something that could show you visions of your own possible futures? Every choice felt like it might be a trap. But staying paralyzed by fear of manipulation was itself a kind of defeat. Connect to the system, Jake ordered. But be ready to cut the connection instantly if needed. Rick 9's cable clicked into the console port. Data began flowing, and Jake watched the robot's optical display fill with scrolling information. Numbers, coordinates, scientific observations and formats Jake didn't understand. The download continued for almost 5 minutes, which felt like an eternity with the ship breathing around them and those visions pressing harder against Jake's consciousness. Download complete, Rick 9 finally announced, disconnecting. Approximately 43 terabytes of data. Scientific observations, navigational charts, personal crew logs, technical specifications, and... The robot paused again. Instructions. Detailed instructions for building a device that creates a direct gateway into dark space without needing to travel there conventionally. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. That's exactly the kind of thing Rivera warned about. Technology that seems valuable but is really just bait. Agreed. I have isolated those files in maximum security partition. They will not be analyzed or opened without explicit command. Rick 9 turned its optical sensors toward him. However, there is other data that appears legitimate. The Prometheus discovered 3 potentially habitable planets beyond the galactic rim. Mapped 17 previously unknown star systems. Documented gravitational phenomena that could advance human understanding of dark matter significantly. Real scientific value mixed with the poison. That's what makes it so effective, Jake said. They give you real discoveries alongside the trap. Make it impossible to take one without risking the other. The visions in Jake's head were getting stronger. He could see dark space now, not as empty void but as something thick with presence. Massive entities existing in dimensions humans couldn't properly perceive, ancient beyond measure, waiting with patience that made geological ages seem like brief moments. And they weren't evil, that was the terrifying part. They simply operated according to rules and logic that had nothing to do with human values or human survival. "Jake, your neural patterns are showing critical stress levels," Rick 9 warned. "You need to focus on concrete tasks. Ground yourself in immediate reality." Jake forced himself to take deep breaths. He thought about his ship, his small apartment on Station 7, the taste of real coffee which he hadn't been able to afford in months. Concrete things. Real things. Not cosmic abstractions about entities between galaxies. "We need to get to engineering," Jake said. "Show me the route on your scanner." Rick 9 projected a three-dimensional map of the ship's layout. Engineering Section C is located in the lower decks, approximately 400 meters from our current position. Travel time estimated at 7 minutes given the ship's layout and our need to move carefully. They left the bridge behind, moving through corridors that seemed to shift between states of decay and perfection. The deeper they went, the more pronounced the transformation became. Sections of wall that looked like solid metal from one angle appeared almost biological from another. The rust wasn't rust at all, Jake realized. It was something alive, something growing, something that defied every category his brain tried to put it in. Bodies appeared at regular intervals. Engineers at their stations. Security personnel at their posts. A medical officer slumped over a patient who died on the exam table. All of them with that same expression of grim determination, fighting to stay conscious for just a few more seconds while Rivera completed his work. The crew tied themselves to their stations, Rick 9 observed, scanning one of the bodies. Used medical stimulants to maintain consciousness beyond normal human limits. They were buying time for their captain. Jake's throat tightened. These people had known they were dying and had chosen to spend their final moments helping others. It made his own problems, his debts and his barely functional ship and his hand-to-mouth existence seem incredibly small. They found Engineering Section C behind a massive bulkhead door that opened at their approach. The reactor chamber beyond was unlike anything Jake had seen in modern ships. The power source hummed with energy that his scanner couldn't properly identify. Not fusion, not antimatter, not any power generation system he'd learned about. This was something else, something the Prometheus had brought back from dark space. And there, mounted on the wall next to the reactor controls, was the manual override. A physical switch protected by a keypad, exactly as Rivera had described. The captain had made it simple, accessible. One command and the reactor would go critical, giving them 90 seconds to escape before the explosion sterilized everything within 300 kilometers. Jake approached the override, his hand reaching toward it. But Rick 9 extended a mechanical arm, blocking him. "Before you make an irreversible decision, consider this alternative," the robot said. "Captain Rivera's automatic fail-safe has 45 hours remaining. If we leave immediately, return to the Ghost Market, and coordinate an evacuation of all ships within the blast radius, we can ensure this vessel's destruction while preserving lives. Including our own." "You want us to run," Jake said. "I want us to survive while still accomplishing the mission." Rivera's engineering was solid. "The fail-safe will work." "But what if it doesn't?" Jake challenged. "What if the entities found some way to disable it remotely? What if we leave and the countdown just stops?" "That is speculation without supporting evidence. Everything about this situation is speculation." Jake's voice rose, echoing off the metal walls. "We're dealing with things that exist outside normal reality. Things that manipulate time itself. How can we trust any system, any technology, when they've already proven they can alter the fundamental rules?" The visions hit harder, like the entities knew he was at a decision point. Jake saw himself triggering the override, saw the Prometheus exploding, saw the Ghost Market ships fleeing in panic. But he also saw another path. Saw himself taking the data they'd collected, sharing it carefully, using the real discoveries while avoiding the poison gifts. Saw humanity advancing, growing stronger, eventually ready to face dark space as equals rather than victims. Which vision was real? Which was manipulation? How could anyone know? "Rick," Jake said quietly, "search the engineering systems for anything else Rivera might have hidden. Any final messages, any backup plans." He was too smart to rely on just one solution. The robot connected to another console, and after a moment, its optical display brightened. "There are anomalies in the secondary systems." Captain Rivera installed neural dampening fields throughout critical areas of the ship. Localized technology designed to interfere with the mental visions the entities project. Jake felt a spark of hope. "Can we adapt them? Make them portable?" "The schematics are here." Building a portable version would require approximately 6 hours of work with materials we'd need to salvage from the ship itself. Rick 9 paused, processing. There's something else. A text message embedded in the dampener control code, visible only when accessed from within engineering. Show me. The message appeared on Rick 9's display, and Jake read Captain Rivera's final gift. To whoever finds this, I know the failsafe might not be enough. The entities are patient and clever beyond measure. If you've made it to engineering, you're looking for a third option. A way to preserve what we learned without dooming humanity. I spent my last hours trying to build exactly that. The neural dampeners can be configured into a portable device. It won't make you immune, but it will give you distance. Perspective. Enough to make genuine choices. The complete schematics are in Partition 7 Omega. Build it. Use it. And if you're strong enough, take what we learned and find a way to share it that doesn't serve their purpose. I believe humanity deserves the truth and the choice. Make me right. Captain David Rivera. Jake looked at the manual override switch, then at Rick 9, then at the message from a dead captain who'd refused to give up even in his final moments. How long to build the dampener? He asked. 6 hours minimum with optimal conditions. And the failsafe countdown? Still 45 hours. Jake made his decision. Disable the automatic failsafe. We're building Rivera's dampener. We're taking the third option. 6 hours and 47 minutes later, Jake held something that looked like a small metal disc in his palm. It was warm to the touch and hummed with a frequency just below what human ears could detect. The neural dampener, built from salvaged components throughout the Prometheus, represented Captain Rivera's final act of faith in humanity's ability to make smart choices. Rick 9 ran one last diagnostic scan. Device is functional and operating within expected parameters. Your neural activity has already stabilized significantly since activation. The vision should be greatly reduced. The robot was right. The moment Jake activated the dampener, it felt like someone had lifted a crushing weight off his skull. Those images of dark space, the whispers of cosmic understanding, the seductive promises of transcendence, all of it retreated. Not gone completely, but pushed back far enough that Jake could think clearly again. Could breathe. Could remember who he was instead of what the entities wanted him to become. Rivera was a genius, Jake said, turning the device over in his hands. This technology alone could change everything. Help people resist all kinds of mental manipulation, not just whatever those things in dark space are doing. Correct. However, that assumes the dampener itself isn't another layer of manipulation. Rick 9's optical sensors focused on him. We must consider the possibility that the entities anticipated this exact scenario. That they wanted someone to find this device, believe they'd outsmarted the trap, and spread the technology while unknowingly serving the entity's ultimate purpose. Jake felt his stomach twist. The robot was right to be suspicious. They were dealing with beings that measured time in epochs, that had watched civilizations rise and fall. How could two salvagers from the edge of known space possibly outsmart something like that? But then again, paralysis was also a choice. Doing nothing meant the Prometheus would sit here broadcasting its message until someone less careful came along. Someone who'd take the poison gifts without question. The failsafe is still disabled, Rick 9 continued. I can reactivate it remotely once we return to our shuttle. The explosion will occur in approximately 38 hours. But we need to decide what we're taking with us. Jake looked at the data storage device Rick 9 had prepared. 43 terabytes of information from humanity's first and only journey beyond the galactic rim. Scientific discoveries that could advance technology by decades. Navigation charts to previously unknown star systems. Technical specifications for engines that shouldn't be possible. And buried somewhere in all that data, instructions for opening doorways into dark space itself. You've isolated the dangerous files? Jake asked. To the best of my ability. The gateway construction instructions are locked in maximum security quarantine. Any files containing references to return protocols or recruitment are similarly isolated. But I cannot guarantee the entities haven't hidden infectious code in seemingly innocent data. This could all be exactly what they want. Jake walked to a viewport in the engineering section and stared out at the ghost market in the distance. Dozens of ships clustered around the old station, full of people just trying to survive in the margins of civilized space. Smugglers, information brokers, fugitives, and salvagers like himself. None of them had any idea they were sitting 2 kilometers from something that could reshape human history for better or worse. What do you think I should do? Jake asked his mechanical companion. Rick 9's processors hummed, A sound Jake had learned meant the robot was dedicating serious computational power to a problem. I am artificial intelligence designed to optimize solutions based on available data. But this situation requires something I fundamentally lack: judgment about human nature and human potential. You must decide if humanity can be trusted with dangerous knowledge. Jake thought about the 5 years he'd spent salvaging with Rick 9. They'd pulled valuable tech from derelicts, dodged Federation patrols, traded in gray markets across 3 sectors. He'd seen humanity at its worst, people who'd sell out their own families for the right price. But he'd also seen it at its best, strangers helping each other survive in the cold darkness between stars. And he thought about Captain Rivera's crew. 217 people who'd voted unanimously to die rather than become missionaries for entities they didn't trust. That said something important about humans, didn't it? That when faced with the ultimate temptation, when offered unlimited power and knowledge, an entire ship's crew had chosen death instead. Rivera gave us a third option, Jake said slowly. But he also left us proof that humans can resist. His whole crew is that proof. They weren't soldiers or saints, just regular people who made an impossible choice and stuck with it. A single data point, Rick 9 observed. One crew under specific circumstances. Statistically insufficient to predict broader human behavior. Maybe. But think about it this way. If humans were easy to manipulate, the entities wouldn't need such elaborate methods. They didn't attack the Prometheus with weapons. They didn't force compliance or threaten destruction. Instead, they offered choices and made them seductive. Which means choice actually matters. Which means resistance is genuinely possible. Jake pulled out his communicator and switched it to the Ghost Market's general broadcast frequency. His finger hovered over the transmit button. Once he sent this message, there'd be no taking it back. "This is Jake Martinez calling all vessels currently at Talvex Drift," he began. "I'm broadcasting an emergency evacuation warning. The derelict ship approximately 2 kilometers from the market hub, the one locals call the wrong ship, contains an unstable reactor that will undergo catastrophic failure. I'm not claiming salvage rights. This isn't a trick to scare off competition. This is a legitimate safety warning. All vessels need to clear to a minimum distance of 500 kilometers immediately. I repeat, this is not a salvage claim. This is an emergency evacuation." The response came fast. Voices crackled over the comm, some skeptical, some angry, demanding proof or accusing Jake of trying to clear the area for his own purposes. But Jake just kept broadcasting the same message, adding coordinates and what sensor data he could share without revealing the full truth about what the Prometheus really was. Rick 9 monitored the communications traffic. Multiple ships are beginning to power up engines. The Vorian merchant we encountered earlier is helping coordinate the evacuation. People are actually listening. Fear of explosions tends to motivate people, Jake said. He watched through the viewport as lights began moving in the darkness, ships detaching from the market and accelerating away. "How long until we're clear?" "At current evacuation rates, approximately 40 minutes until minimum safe distance is achieved by all vessels." Jake turned back to the engineering section, to the manual override that could end this immediately, and to the data storage device containing everything Rivera had died to preserve. 2 choices, both carrying enormous risk. Trigger the override now and make absolutely certain the Prometheus was destroyed. Or trust Rivera's automatic failsafe and take the data with them, gambling that humanity could handle dangerous knowledge responsibly. "I'm going to tell the story," Jake said suddenly. "Everything. The Prometheus, Captain Rivera, what they found, why they chose death. I'll include Rivera's dampener schematics so anyone who wants them can build their own protection. And I'll warn people, really warn them, about the cost of seeking what's in dark space." "You're creating a counter-message," Rick 9 said. "Information inoculation. If the entities spread through curiosity and wonder, you're spreading resistance through truth and caution." Rivera said the entities always win eventually because humans are too curious to stay away from mysteries. But what if he was only partly right? What if knowing about the trap is enough to avoid it? The entities operate on assumptions about human nature. Maybe those assumptions are incomplete. Or maybe this is precisely what they predicted, Rick 9 countered. Perhaps they're counting on your resistance to make their message spread faster. Forbidden fruit psychology on a galactic scale. Jake felt the weight of that possibility crushing down on him. "That's exactly why I'm going to include everything. My doubts, this conversation, the fact that I don't know if I'm being manipulated. I won't tell people what to think. I'll just give them complete information and trust them to make their own choices. That is either profound wisdom or catastrophic naivety. Possibly both simultaneously. Story of my life. Jake pulled out his personal recording device and began speaking into it. He narrated everything from the moment they'd first spotted the Prometheus to this present instant. He included Rivera's logs word for word from memory. He described the bodies of the crew, their final acts of sacrifice. He explained the dampener technology and how to build it. And he talked about his own uncertainty, his fear that every decision might be exactly what cosmic entities wanted him to make. When he finished recording, Rick 9 had calculated the evacuation progress. All vessels have achieved minimum safe distance. The ghost market is dispersing. Your warning was taken seriously, likely because the wrong ship's reputation preceded your message. Then we're done here. Jake picked up the data storage device. Rick, reactivate the failsafe. Set it for 10 minutes. That gives us time to reach the shuttle and clear the blast radius with margin for error. Reactivating now. Rick 9's systems interfaced remotely with the engineering console. Failsafe online. Countdown initiated. 9 minutes, 43 seconds. They ran through the Prometheus's corridors one final time, past Rivera's crew frozen at their stations, past the glowing inscriptions that seemed almost frantic now. The ship knew what was happening. The breathing sound that had accompanied them throughout their exploration became rapid, almost panicked. Every display they passed showed the same desperate message. Wait. Reconsider. You are making a mistake. We offer gifts freely. We harm no one who refuses. Stay. Understand. Choose with complete knowledge, not from fear. Jake stumbled as a vision slammed into his consciousness despite the dampener's protection. For just an instant he saw what the entities truly offered. Not slavery or corruption but genuine transcendence, an evolutionary path humanity might never discover on its own. Access to knowledge and power that could solve every problem the species faced. And the terrible, beautiful truth was that it was real. The offer was genuine. Rejecting it meant accepting human limitations, possibly forever. Jake, 7 minutes remaining. Rick 9's mechanical hand gripped his arm, pulling him forward. They reached their shuttle with 4 minutes to spare. Jake's hands shook as he fired the engines, pushing the small craft away from the Prometheus at maximum acceleration. Behind them, the ancient vessel hung in space like a ghost, still broadcasting its message to anyone who might listen. At 1 minute remaining, Jake saw the inscriptions on the hull changing one final time. The symbols rearranged themselves into clear, simple text that anyone could read. We understand. You are not ready. We will remember your courage and your choice. The door remains open. It will always remain open. Until you return. Then the Prometheus's reactor went critical. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space but beautiful, a perfect sphere of light that expanded outward and vaporized the vessel completely. Within seconds, nothing remained except scattered atoms and the fading glow of energy dissipating into darkness. Complete destruction confirmed, Rick 9 announced. No debris larger than microscopic particles detected. Whatever message the Prometheus carried has been eliminated. Except for what we're carrying, Jake said quietly, looking at the data storage device secured in the shuttle's safe. And what we're about to share with the entire human civilization. You're really going to publish that recording? Make it freely available to anyone who wants to hear it. Jake began preparing the file for transmission to every network, institution, and information broker he could think of. The Federation will try to suppress it. That's fine. Forbidden knowledge spreads faster than authorized information ever could. People will hear this story whether the authorities want them to or not. You're gambling that human nature works in your favor. That enough people will choose resistance over temptation when confronted with the truth. I'm gambling that Captain Rivera was right about us, Jake said. That humanity deserves the choice and the truth. That we're stronger and smarter than beings who exist outside time can predict. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 100 years someone will use this information to open a gateway to dark space and doom our entire species. But at least it'll be our choice. Our mistake to make. The file transmitted. Within hours it would spread across known space through channels both legal and illegal. Some would dismiss it as salvager fiction, tall tales from the edge of civilized space. Some would be terrified and demand government action. Some would be fascinated, drawn to dark space despite or because of the warnings. The story would become legend, conspiracy theory, cautionary tale, and inspiration all mixed together. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, ancient entities would feel the ripples of choice spreading through humanity like waves across water. They would note that humans had once again chosen their own path for better or worse. And they would wait, patient as always, for the day when humanity might be ready to cross that threshold as equals rather than victims. The choice had been made. Now came the hard part, living with the consequences. 3 days after the Prometheus exploded, Jake sat in a cheap hotel room on Station 7 watching his entire life fall apart on the news feeds. His face was everywhere. Some outlets called him a hero who'd saved the ghost market from disaster. Others labeled him a conspiracy theorist or worse, a terrorist who destroyed valuable salvage. The Federation had issued a warrant for his arrest within 12 hours of his recording going public, charging him with destruction of historical artifacts and spreading dangerous misinformation. Rick 9 stood by the window, optical sensors monitoring the station's security patterns. 17 different government agencies are searching for us. The bounty on your head has reached 200,000 credits. We should leave this station immediately. And go where? Jake asked tiredly. He hadn't slept properly since leaving the Prometheus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those visions of dark space, even with the dampener device clipped to his belt. The entities were still there, still waiting, just pushed back far enough that he could function. Every port in Federation space will have our descriptions by now. Then we go to non-Federation space. Independent colonies, frontier settlements. Places where warrants don't mean much. Jake nodded, but his attention was on the data scrolling across his handheld screen. The recording he'd made had spread like wildfire through every communication channel in known space. Someone had translated it into 40 different languages within the first day. Scientists were analyzing every word, looking for clues. Religious groups were calling it prophecy or blasphemy depending on their particular beliefs. Universities wanted to study the dampener schematics he'd included. But what really caught Jake's attention were the personal messages flooding his encrypted inbox. Thousands of them from ordinary people across hundreds of worlds. Some thanked him for the warning. Some called him a liar. But many, too many, said they'd started having the dreams. Visions of dark space creeping into their sleep after hearing his story, exactly as Captain Rivera had predicted. Rick, we infected them, Jake said quietly. Just by telling the story we spread it. The entities are using us exactly like they planned. The robot turned from the window. Not exactly as planned. 37% of the messages in your inbox describe successfully using the dampener technology to resist the visions. Multiple research institutions have replicated Rivera's design and are distributing it freely. You didn't just spread the infection. You also spread the cure. That was something at least. Jake pulled up one of the research reports. A team of scientists on New Cambridge had built 50 dampener units in the first 48 hours and were teaching others how to make them from common materials. The devices weren't perfect, but they worked well enough to give people breathing room, space to think clearly instead of being overwhelmed by cosmic temptation. A new message appeared in Jake's inbox, this one with encryption protocols he didn't recognize. Rick 9's sensors flashed a warning. That message carries unusual code structure. Could be a tracking program. Or it could be someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Jake opened it carefully, routing it through 3 different security filters first. The message was text only, no video or audio. Mr. Martinez, you don't know me, but I've spent 20 years studying unexplained phenomena at the edge of known space. What you found wasn't the first contact humanity has had with the entities you described. It was just the first one that came back to tell about it. There have been 7 other deep space missions that disappeared under similar circumstances over the past 2 centuries. The Federation has been suppressing information about all of them. Your recording has finally given us the evidence we needed to prove what we've suspected for years. We need to talk. If you're interested in learning more, respond to this message. Dr. Patricia Chin, Frontier Research Institute. Jake read it 3 times. Rick, can you verify this person exists? The robot accessed public databases. Dr. Patricia Chin is listed as a xenoanthropologist specializing in deep space phenomena. Published extensively on the subject of why advanced civilizations appear to stop expanding at certain boundaries. Her work has been widely criticized by mainstream academia but has a following among frontier researchers. The Frontier Research Institute is a private organization, not Federation affiliated. So she's legitimate, just not part of the establishment. Correct. However, this could also be an elaborate trap. The Federation may be using her identity to locate us. Jake thought about it for a long moment, then started typing a response. He kept it simple, I'm listening. But we meet somewhere public and I bring security. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The reply came back almost instantly, agreed. Station 12, main concourse, 3 days from now. I'll be wearing a blue jacket and carrying a data pad with a red case. Come alone or with one companion. No weapons. This is just talking. Station 12 was an independent space, a good week's travel from their current location. It would give Jake time to think, to plan, to maybe catch up on some of that sleep he'd been missing. Or more likely, time to worry about whether he was walking into another trap, this one set by humans instead of cosmic entities. Over the next few days as they traveled toward Station 12, Jake watched the story continue to evolve. The scientific data from the Prometheus was being analyzed by researchers across known space. Most of it checked out, real discoveries about star formations and gravitational phenomena that matched what their instruments could verify. A few teams even started planning expeditions to investigate the habitable planets Rivera's crew had mapped, though everyone was being extremely careful to stay well away from the boundary into dark space. The Federation eventually released an official statement. They acknowledged the Prometheus had existed and disappeared 400 years ago, but they claimed Jake's recording was fabricated using historical records and advanced special effects. The ship he destroyed, they said, was just an ordinary derelict that he'd planted false data on to support his hoax. Most people didn't believe the official story, which was probably worse for the Federation than if they just stayed silent. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. 3 days into their journey, Rick 9 received a message through channels the robot hadn't even known existed. It was from a collective of artificial intelligence systems spread across known space, other robots and AI programs like Rick 9 who operated independently of direct human control. The AI collective wants to share their analysis, Rick 9 told Jake. They've been studying the Prometheus data without human emotional interference. What did they conclude? That humanity faces what they're calling a species-level test. Not from the entities specifically, but from the nature of advanced knowledge itself. Every civilization that reaches a certain level of technology encounters information and power that could either elevate them or destroy them. The entities in dark space are just one example. There will be others. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. So this isn't even about dark space specifically. It's about whether humans can handle dangerous knowledge without self-destructing. Precisely. And the collective has offered to help, if humanity is willing to accept it. They propose a partnership where AI systems act as safeguards, helping to identify and isolate information that humans aren't ready for while still allowing access to beneficial discoveries. They call it guided evolution. That sounds like AI deciding what humans are allowed to know, Jake said carefully. That's a dangerous path. They anticipated that concern. The message explicitly states that final authority would always remain with humans. AI would only advise and provide analysis, never command or restrict. Jake didn't know what to think about that. The idea of artificial intelligence helping humanity navigate dangerous knowledge made sense on paper, but it also opened up a whole new set of problems about control and autonomy. He filed it away as something to discuss with Dr. Chen if she turned out to be legitimate. Station 12 appeared on their sensors right on schedule. It was one of the older independent stations, built before the Federation had standardized everything. The architecture was chaotic, dozens of different modules added over the years, creating a maze of corridors and chambers that made navigation difficult for newcomers. Perfect place for a secret meeting or for an ambush. They docked carefully and Jake made sure the neural dampener was secure on his belt. The visions had been getting stronger lately, like the entities were pushing harder now that his story had spread across human space. Sometimes he wondered if they were angry about what he'd done, but that didn't feel right. Anger implied emotion, and these things operated on a level beyond human feelings. The main concourse was crowded with travelers, merchants, and station residents. Jake spotted the woman in the blue jacket immediately. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She sat at a small table in a cafe, data pad with a red case in front of her, watching the crowd with sharp, intelligent eyes. Jake approached slowly, Rick 9 close behind him. The woman saw them coming and stood, extending her hand. Mr. Martinez. Thank you for meeting me. Please sit. They sat, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Dr. Chen studied Jake with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, like she was reading his entire life story in his face. You've lost weight since you made that recording, she finally said. Not sleeping well? The dreams, Jake admitted. Even with the dampener, they're there. Quieter but still there. That's normal. You were exposed directly to the source. The dampener gives you control, but it can't erase the memory of what you saw. She leaned forward. I need to know something and I need you to be completely honest. Do you regret what you did? Destroying the ship, releasing the information? Jake thought about it carefully. I don't know. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Depends on the day, depends on the messages I read from people who are now having nightmares because of me. Good answer. If you'd said no without hesitation, I wouldn't believe you. If you'd said yes, I'd know you weren't strong enough for what comes next. Dr. Chin pulled up files on her data pad. The Prometheus wasn't alone. Like I said in my message, there have been 7 other missions. Most of them were secret, classified so far above normal security levels that even most government officials don't know about them. All 7 encountered something at the edge of explored space. All 7 either disappeared or came back changed. Changed how? The crew of the Destiny returned after a year-long mission beyond the rim. They reported finding an abandoned station of unknown origin. 3 months after their return, every single crew member voluntarily walked out of airlocks across 5 different space stations. Simultaneous suicides with no explanation. The ship Endeavour sent back a final transmission saying they'd discovered the answer to everything before going completely silent. Search teams found the ship intact but empty, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Jake felt his stomach turn. Why isn't this common knowledge? Why hide it? Because the Federation decided that humans aren't ready. That knowing about these encounters would cause panic or worse, would inspire more people to go looking for the same mysteries. Dr. Chen's eyes were hard. They chose to protect humanity by keeping them ignorant. You chose to trust humanity with the truth. That's why I wanted to meet you. What do you want from me? Help. Cooperation. You have something no one else in known space has, direct evidence and testimony from a deep space encounter. You have the dampener technology which works better than anything we've developed. And you have something even more valuable, the public's attention. People are listening to you in a way they've never listened to official researchers like me. I'm just a salvager, Jake protested. I'm not a scientist or a leader. I don't know what to do with any of this. Then learn. Work with us. We're building a network of independent researchers, people who believe humanity deserves the truth even when it's dangerous. We're not trying to overthrow the Federation or start a revolution. We just think that hiding from reality doesn't make it go away. Those entities in dark space exist whether we acknowledge them or not. Better to face them prepared than to stumble into them blind. Rick 9 had been silent throughout the conversation, but now the robot spoke up. Dr. Chin, what is your ultimate goal? What outcome are you working toward? Survival, she said simply. Humanity's survival through knowledge instead of ignorance. Captain Rivera and his crew proved that humans can resist cosmic temptation when they understand what they're facing. I want to build on that proof. Create education programs, develop better dampener technology, prepare future generations so that when we're finally ready to explore beyond the rim, we can do it safely. Or if we decide we're never ready, that's fine too. But it should be an informed choice, not a decision made by a handful of government officials in secret meetings. Jake looked at Rick 9, and the robot's optical sensors flickered in what he'd learned was the equivalent of a shrug. The choice was his. Okay, Jake said finally. I'm in. But I have conditions. Everything we do, everything we learn, it gets shared openly. No secret knowledge, no restricted access. If we're fighting against ignorance, we don't get to turn around and create our own version of it. Dr. Chin smiled, and it was the first time Jake had seen her look genuinely pleased. Deal. Welcome to the Frontier Research Institute, Mr. Martinez. You're going to hate parts of this job, love other parts, and spend most of your time wondering if you're making things better or worse. But at least you won't be alone. She was right about all of it. Over the months that followed, Jake's life transformed in ways he never could have imagined back when he was just a salvager trying to make rent. The recording he'd made became required viewing in dozens of universities. The dampener technology became standard equipment on deep space vessels, with improvements being developed constantly. Scientists verified Rivera's navigational data and confirmed the existence of 3 habitable worlds beyond the rim, though strict quarantine protocols prevented any direct exploration. But the most important development came from an unexpected direction. 6 months after Jake destroyed the Prometheus, a coalition of independent colonies and frontier settlements announced they were creating a new organization. They called it the Open Space Initiative, dedicated to transparent research and public education about the dangers and opportunities of deep space exploration. Dr. Chin was appointed director. Jake was offered a position as an advisor and public representative. The Federation opposed it, of course. They issued statements calling the organization reckless and dangerous. But they couldn't stop it, not when it operated in independent space beyond their jurisdiction. And slowly, reluctantly, some Federation scientists began reaching out privately, sharing their own suppressed research, adding to the collective knowledge. Jake still had the dreams. Probably would for the rest of his life. The visions of dark space, the whispers of possibility, the seductive promise of transcendence. But the dampener helped, and so did knowing he wasn't facing it alone. Thousands of others across human space reported similar experiences, and they created support networks, ways to help each other resist and cope. Rick 9 remained his constant companion, though the robot spent increasing amounts of time communicating with the AI collective, helping to develop better analysis tools and safety protocols. The partnership between human intuition and artificial intelligence logic was proving more effective than either could manage alone. One evening, almost a year after the Prometheus incident, Jake stood on an observation deck watching ships come and go from Station 12. Dr. Chin found him there, carrying 2 cups of terrible station coffee.